Um, awesome. So welcome to the third year BA thesis capstone information session. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the BA thesis process, the application that goes into that, as well as the various capstone options that you have available to you moving forward. This is a brief agenda of some of the things that we're going to be discussing. A few of these that you will probably want to keep in mind are the actual expectations for the BA thesis, the capstone, and then specific dates for the application itself, and also for grants and funding for some of the research that you may want to do over the summer or next year. So at this point in time, as a third year student, you have two options available to you. One is to complete either a BA thesis or a BA capstone project during your fourth year. Students can complete either the thesis or the capstone, but to receive honors in the major, the following criteria need to be met. One of the reasons I'm bringing this up now is just so that you can make an assessment before you fill out a BA thesis application, so you understand sort of where you are in the process. But in order to receive honors, you need to receive a high pass on the final draft of your BA thesis, which you would submit at the end of your fourth year. You have to maintain a minimum overall GPA of 3.25, and you have to maintain a minimum GPA within the major of a 3.7. So before you sit down and fill out your BA thesis application or decide to do a capstone, just make sure that you're aware of how these, especially these last two bullet points, apply specifically to your progress at the University of Chicago. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the BA thesis, and then halfway through, I'm going to hand it over to Jess to talk about the capstone options that are available to you. The BA thesis. So this is an extended piece of research, anywhere between 40 and 60 pages in length, that is conducted independently by students under faculty supervision. So you will have a faculty advisor that helps you through this process on a one-on-one basis, while you are also in a BA thesis colloquium that I and another individual will be teaching next year in the fall and the winter. Your BA thesis is going to be guided by a specific research question and specific sub-questions that help build out that major research question. This question should be narrow enough to be fully addressed within the context of a single year, yet it should also be expansive enough to have broader scholarly relevance. The project is going to be supported by evidence. Obviously, that should be pretty clear by now when you're doing an advanced research project. But this kind of evidence ranges from qualitative to quantitative evidence. I will get into that a little bit more when I go through the BA thesis application itself, so you have a firmer understanding of what constitutes evidence and what could potentially work for a project like this. A lot of the evidence that you gather can either be gathered from publicly available sources, or it can be generated through your own data collection, like surveys or interviews. So it really depends on the nature of your research question and the nature of the project itself. And then, as I mentioned before, this is a project that is supervised by a faculty member with whom you have established some sort of shared expectations, and you end up working closely with them throughout the school year. So for many of you who are in your third year, there are a handful of really important dates that I want to bring to your attention. The first is starting next week, so in week 7, and then in week 8 and in week 9, there are going to be a handful of thesis brainstorming sessions that will give you the opportunity to try and identify a topic, develop sort of preliminary research questions, and identify various sources of evidence that you can draw from to help you answer those research questions next year. I have more information about these brainstorming sessions on a later slide with specific dates, times, and people that will be a part of those brainstorming sessions. Sometime between now and the very end of March, you will need to meet with a preceptor or a research mentor. Both of these people are listed here, Derek and Nina. Unfortunately, they couldn't be with us during the information session. But if you click on their names, once you get access to these PowerPoint slides, it will take you directly to their email so you can schedule appointments with them. You're also welcome to meet with a potential faculty advisor, or with me to talk. All of this is to talk about the BA thesis application. So I've gone through in consultation with other folks from CEGU to update the BA thesis application process. And one of the things that I want to make sure of is that you have collaborated with a preceptor or research mentor or faculty advisor on the application itself. So fill the application out to the best of your ability and then have someone else look over it before you click submit to make sure that all of the expectations that CEGU has are being met in that application. Then the application is due on March 29th. One suggestion that I have is reach out to people well before March 29th. If you reach out to us on March 28th, there's a good chance that we're busy. So I would probably try and build in at least a week before the 29th deadline. And that's like a short period of time. So more than a week would be advised. Once you submit that on April 12th, about 2 weeks after you submit the application, you're going to get notification from CEGU about whether you have been accepted into the BA thesis program. Once you have been accepted, there are a series of additional events that occur throughout spring quarter, including further brainstorming sessions, as well as info sessions on grants and funding applications. Plus, there's a handful of other expectations that you'll find out more about. I just don't want to belabor the topic at this point, especially if many of you are considering the capstone. Once you've been accepted into the BA thesis program, there are a handful of things that you'll do this quarter. You'll also be expected to conduct or at least do reading over the summer related to your project. And then once you come back in the fall quarter of your 4th year, you'll enroll in a 2-quarter BA thesis sequence. So the first takes place in fall, the second takes place in winter of your 4th year. And then in the spring of your 4th year, you also have a handful of final thesis deadlines where you submit the final revised draft. And you also have a symposium at the end of spring quarter where you provide a 10-minute presentation on your work, complete with PowerPoint slides. And it's also great because you get the opportunity to see how everyone else's projects have also wrapped up. So in a program like CEGU, which is extremely interdisciplinary, you have an almost infinite number of options available to you in terms of topics that you can pursue for your thesis project. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other options available to you, but they are topics. If you choose a topic that does not appear here, it should still fall within the umbrella of environment, geography, and or urbanization. If you're doing something that's like purely economic, that really does not relate to environment, geography, or urbanization, then it probably is not suitable for a CEGU BA thesis. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about topics that you want to pursue. I say this especially for students that are double majoring. So if you have another major that you're pursuing and it does not necessarily relate to CEGU, you might want to think about restructuring that BA thesis project so that it fits under this umbrella, or pursuing that BA thesis project, and then doing a capstone within CEGU if you don't want to actually reform that project for your other major. So some of the potential topics include climate change. Obviously, this is kind of the place where you would do something like that. Food and farming, transportation and mobility, sustainability practices, community engagement, energy, and then topics related to Chicago in particular. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've left off of this list that I can think of off the top of my head, but I can't at the moment. So one thing I will say about this is that these are the topics, but there are ways that you can approach this topic. Each of those ways differs. And so you could do this from a historical perspective. You could do this from an economics perspective, a public policy perspective. It really depends on what your interests are, what experiences you've had at UChicago, what majors or minors you are doing in addition to CEGU. So keep all of that in mind when you're thinking about potential research topics. You will get access to these slides after the presentation. And one of the things that we did was post links to past BA theses from, I believe, the past 5 years, 4 or 5 years. So I encourage you to look through these. You don't need to read them in depth, but to get a sense of what people have pitched as projects, what the projects actually look like in their finished form. I imagine many of you haven't seen a BA thesis as it's been completed. This is a great opportunity to do this, to see what that looks like. If you get through all of these and you want more, we have other options. I believe it's Knowledge at UChicago. It's like a bank of BA theses from across campus, not just from CEGU. But if you go through that process, just make sure you click on the Environmental and Urban Studies link. I don't believe UChicago, like the knowledge database, has updated it to CEGU, so just be aware that it still says Environmental and Urban Studies. So I wanted to take a moment to pause. We have a few people here today who are currently in the BA thesis program. And so I wanted to give them a chance to talk a little bit about their experience going through the BA thesis. What is your project on? How did you come up with the project idea? What did you do after you submitted your application and before fall quarter started to prepare you for this process? And then if you have any advice for people who are considering a BA thesis in CEGU, that would be particularly helpful. So Sophia, let's start with you if that's okay.
My thesis is on a site in Paris, which is kind of like a community garden, but a lot more expansive than that. It was occupied by local community members in 2019, and since then they just informally still owned by the same company and transformed it into this big community space that is just completely on the volunteer and resource level. Give classes and ecologically minded movements. And so I found the site in Paris while I was studying abroad for this program last winter, and I originally used it as like for a different project for a class, and then realized that I was really interested in it and wanted to explore more in depth and how it related to Paris's current city urban planning framework and how it's operating outside of that. So that is sort of my topic, and I applied in late March, as we were saying, but I realized that I needed definitely to go back into more on-the-ground research and sort of the trajectory of the operation of the site, but then also its regulation. So I applied for the Charles Gray Research Fellowship, which I assume was doing again, and got funding to be able to go back and do my research in like months. So I combined also just giving some of that I went back to so yeah, I think that unusually a lot over the summer compared to most people, but is like a good way to set up a project. And I think talking also to Jonathan, just everyone's getting a chance to go abroad and stumble upon her thesis in that way. But I think just like going back to the projects that you've done more generally in your classes and recognizing what timeline and develop one of that is just right.
Yeah, Jonathan, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Garcia. I'm a fourth year. I study environmental studies and policy. My thesis is about climate change's impact on Lake Michigan water levels and what effect that'll have on public beach access. So to give some chronology, I guess, I didn't come at this as perhaps in such a direct way as Sophia did. I came into the thesis process with a completely different topic in mind. I did my application, I got funding, I was good to go. Somewhere around mid-June, I had a sort of existential crisis. You know, it's like, I don't think this is going to work for me. I need to figure something out. So I did a rush of sort of refiguring things and coming up with a different topic. It took me about a month and a half to apply. And yeah, as Sophia said, I think the way that I came to that topic was sort of reflecting on previous projects that I had done, what interests were driving me ideologically. I knew that I wanted it to be about Chicago, for example. I knew that I particularly care about coastal law and beach access for some reason. And so that is sort of what drove me to come to that topic. But yeah, I think I guess the moral of my story is like some reflection is good, and also having some patience with yourself is definitely a good idea. It would be nice if you could be able to do some work over the summer like Sophia did. But ultimately, when you come back in the fall, you'll have ample time to still develop your idea further and then, really start to get. So yeah, have some grace with yourself for sure. And yeah, just do what it is you're interested in. I know that's not a very helpful thing to say, but it's true. So
Parker, did you also have?
Yeah, I'm Parker, fourth year in urban studies, and I have a minor in GIS. Although I haven't really thought about this much, as sitting in some sandwiches inside that. So, my thesis is called Lakefront and Limbo, an urban critique of Lakeshore Drive. And I had quite a different experience today in that I struggled with the topic for quite a long time. I would say I was thinking about it all of my third year. And then way into the thesis process as well. I changed probably about 8 times sober, right?
On a low estimate, yeah. Yeah.
We started with thinking, I'll relate it partner just choose something that really pisses you off, and then you'll be able to talk about it. So I chose Lakeshore Drive because I hate it. And then I was like, well, man. Then I saw it in Ryan, I looked at transit access, I looked at a huge number of different things. Spent the entire summer like within my soul searching mood, as I called it. And then eventually ended up back at Lakeshore Drive. Mostly because I gave up, but also because I really think it. And so, yeah, moving on to my sort of advice, that would be do a lot of research in the summer. So that's been my experience. Like I know it depends on you yourself and how you manage time. But the way that I manage time is not poorly. So I recommend doing a lot of work, doing a lot of reading, especially literature review. I am still doing literature review. The literature review draft was turned in weeks ago. I'm still doing literature review and editing as we go. So I would say, do a lot of your reading if you can, and if you're willing to do research over the summer. That way you come into the BA well prepared, knowing what you want to do, knowing what kind of questions you want to ask, to research preceptors you can resource. Yeah, and then of course, just not being afraid to accept feedback, not being afraid to change your mind on some things, compromise on others. Just remember that, you know, everybody in the colloquium, everybody, you know, the stoker sometimes wants you to succeed. Yeah, stoker. Everybody's rooting for you. Everybody's rooting for you. People aren't trying to drag you down. Criticism is going to be there. Sometimes it'll hurt, but you know, it's going to make you a better writer. It's going to make your thesis better at the end of the day. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have.
Cool. Did you have some? Yeah.
Advice also, if that's something really big to us. And so you're gonna be spending a lot of time on the project, and so you don't want to be like so like what motivates me is always that I and how
That doesn't mind. Yes, it's anything pretty much. Yeah, something you love, something you make, something you're super interested in. It's something that's going to drive you through this whole process. You're spending a long time. Really long time with this thesis. It will feel like years. But I will also say that, you know, don't do what I did and don't try to make a thesis. Don't have an answer in your head and then make a thesis fit around it. I came into this, I love Lakeshore Drive. I'm going to write a thesis that implies demolition of it, so I can destroy it and build fires. And so I'm like, okay, now what question can I ask that will lead to the answer of kill it with fire? Don't do that. Keep them that. You know, you're doing research, you're asking a question, you might not know the answer, and who knows, you might be wrong. I'm wrong in my thesis sometimes, based on my hypothesis. That's okay. I mean, it's academics. You're researching.
Sabina, did you have something to add?
But you know, pick something you love, something you hate, or something you just want to know more about. Because if you come into it with very strong opinions, you have to be open to those opinions being wrong or different or something else. You might not find what you wanted to find. So just be very open-minded about it.
Yeah. One thing I'll add to this, and it's just based on my own personal experience when I did a BA thesis. You're not signing your life or your career up for the project that you choose. Okay, like I went into my BA thesis in a history program and I looked at early modern Elizabethan portraiture. And it went so well that I now focus on infectious diseases in the Pacific. So all of that is to say, like, it's not necessarily the content expertise or knowledge that you get out of this. It's the skill set. And learning how to read a ton, collect data, analyze that data, and then package your analysis of that data into something that is marketable for other people who know nothing about your project is probably the most valuable skill set that you can get from this experience. That's what I got from it, and I've been able to apply it to a handful of other research projects along the way, both in academia and outside of academia. So doing a BA thesis has helped me not only get through grad school and a postdoc and my faculty, like my professional career, it's also helped me in like political think tank contexts as well. So just keep all of this in mind. It's a really valuable thing to pursue moving forward. A couple of things, these are sort of the nuts and bolts and logistics that are unfortunately boring, but they are things that you do need to know about. If your project deals with surveys or interviews or focus groups, one thing that you will have to do is go through, or you will need approval from the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. There's a ton of contact information here. If you do need to go through the IRB process, that is something that we will cover in more detail in the fall in BA Colloquium 1. If, like Sophia, you need to conduct interviews over the summer or surveys over the summer before fall quarter has started, one thing I'll ask is that you reach out to me before the end of the school year so that we can chat about well, you'll need to do it well before the end of the school year because you will need to get IRB approval. And I want to help you get through that process because it can seem a little daunting at first glance. It's not necessarily something you want to do on your own. It is something that you do want to have input from a faculty advisor. So yeah, just keep this in mind. Okay. The other boring part, but probably the most important part, is the BA thesis application process. So this information can be found on the CEGU website. There's also going to be a link in the PowerPoint slides that you have access to, so you can get all of this on your own at some point. This is a pretty standard application. It asks for basic information. There are a couple of things that I wanted to go over, though, just to clarify and answer any questions that you might have. So in addition to telling us why you want to do a thesis or what your proposed project is going to be about, we also want you to spend a little bit of time thinking about various types of data, whether that be qualitative or quantitative. Where do you want to get the information that you're basing your entire project on? Where do you want to get that information from? What kind of research methods do you plan or do you hope to use in your project, and why do you want to use those? I've provided a handful of small, there we go. Now you can actually read it. I provided a handful or a short list of different types of quantitative and qualitative research methodologies that you could pursue, but this is not exhaustive, okay? There are other options available to you. You just need to be aware of what those are, and you'll have to list them. In addition, we also want to know what kind of experiences you've had with these research methods. So if you're proposing a project that requires spatial analysis or statistical analysis, and you've literally never looked at a map in your life, or you don't know what numbers are, we want you to rethink what kind of research methods you're planning to propose. What we don't want is for you to show up on the first day of fall quarter saying you're going to do this kind of project and then realize that, okay, well, can you take all of these other classes that are going to help you learn those skills that you can then apply to this research project? So think about what you've been doing over the past 3.5 years at the University of Chicago, and take that knowledge and apply it to the way you actually plan to analyze this information that you collect. In terms of faculty advisors, so there's a slight change to this process. In the past, you would just sit down with someone that you would potentially want to work with and get them to agree to be your supervisor on your BA thesis. We have switched that up a little bit to try and even out the workload among faculty advisors. So what we're going to ask you to do is refer to this link. It takes you directly to the people page on Canvas, or sorry, on the CEGU people page, where you will see core CEGU faculty and affiliated CEGU faculty. And what we're going to ask you to do is provide the names of 3 potential faculty advisors that you would like to work with and who you think would be able to supervise your BA thesis project. You don't need to know them personally. It helps, but you don't need to. And your decision to list their name can be based on their area of expertise. It can be based on the kinds of research methods that they apply to their own research. It's really up to you how you decide to put their name down, why you decide to put their name down. If you are double majoring or you have taken classes with faculty that are not affiliated with CEGU, and they have agreed to supervise your project, you can put their name. We ask you to put their name down. That's just like a caveat to our requirement. If you find someone in, let's say, sociology who's unaffiliated with CEGU and they agree to supervise your project, you can just put that information down and you can skip the like provide 3 potential names. You don't need to do that if someone's already agreed to supervise your project. Before submitting your application, as I mentioned earlier, you have to meet with either Derek or Nina, a preceptor or a research mentor, or a faculty member within SIGU, most likely me. You can reach out to me, you can email me. I'm happy to sit down and chat about this application with you. But you will need to provide the name of the person that you meet with. We just want to make sure that all of the information you include in the application is really sort of serving you when we start looking through all of these applications to collectively. There's also a list of criteria that you have to either agree to or not agree to. If you agree to it, then you can pursue the BA thesis option. But these are things that you do need to agree to. So you have to be present for BA Colloquium 1 and 2. So you do have to be on campus and registered in this class during the fall and during the winter of your 4th year. That means you'll unfortunately have to choose between studying abroad or completing a thesis, okay? It also means that if the BA thesis class is at a specific time on a specific day, you will have to rearrange your schedule accordingly so that you can actually enroll and be in class for the full period of time. By the end of spring quarter, you'll have to meet with your faculty advisor in order to discuss your proposed topic. You'll have to come up with potential research questions that you can pursue. And you also need to come up with a summer reading list. We're going to ask that that information be sent to probably me. I haven't decided if it's me or like SIGU in general, but most likely me by the end of spring quarter, just so that we all know that you're sort of venturing off into the summer with actual things to do with regard to your research. And then one of the last sort of major things is on the first day of fall quarter, when you come back after a summer of completing your reading list, the one thing we're going to ask is that you submit a 10-entry annotated bibliography of secondary sources. This will help you with some of the first assignments you have to do in fall quarter, like your lit review. It will also give you a better sense of how viable your project actually is. I think a lot of students think they have a viable project and then they start reading like 1 or 2 books and they're like, oh, this actually ain't gonna work. And you have to start rethinking things. So we want to get that process started a little bit earlier rather than you doing it in like the 3rd week of your fall quarter and you're coming up with a whole new project on the spot. So if you click yes, we're good to go. If you have any questions about anything on this application, please reach out to me. I'm happy to clarify. You'll also have a handful of opportunities to meet with different people in these brainstorming sessions. So it should be relatively straightforward once you get a chance to sit down and look at the application in greater detail. This is just a compilation of important dates that you'll need to know about. These are the ones that you should probably be aware about right now because they are coming up starting next week. Various brainstorming sessions, they'll be held here. And then in spring quarter, there's just a handful of thesis application deadlines, notification deadlines, grant application and funding workshops and deadlines. If you have any questions about these, let me know as well, because I can provide more information if you have any questions. And then Chicago Studies. So we have Chris Scrable with us from Chicago Studies, and so I want to give you a few minutes to thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Chris. I run the Chicago Studies program here. Chicago Studies is kind of a resourcing opportunity that exists within the broader college to support scholarship and teaching about the city that we call home. If you are thinking about a Chicago project, there are some resources that are available to you. kind of one of the most notable is if you want someone to kick around some project ideas with, you're thinking into a Chicago-focused project, you're thinking about partnering, or you want your project to be in relation to a piece of Chicago history or in conjunction with a Chicago data set, a particular community-based organization that you're really interested in crafting the question that is in relation to. I'm always happy to meet with you to kind of talk through the project that you're thinking about by virtue of having worked with a lot of other students and read a lot of other Chicago-focused BAs over the years. I have a pretty good sense at this point of kind of the landscape of what's out there, and also the landscape of the people within the university ecosystem who are asking questions about or thinking about Chicago. Sometimes there are resources, people that are available to you that maybe aren't on your radar, and talking to someone who has a real focus on Chicago can be of assistance to you. I'm not the content expert, but I might be able to connect you with someone who could be a content expert. So just offering that to you. Usually I'm around here on Wednesdays, but also always available online. Go to the Chicago Studies website, and there are links there to make appointments. Very easy to get in touch with me. Chicago Studies does sponsor occasional research workshops. Most of those are in conjunction with sort of some ongoing historical projects that we're doing. But again, if you're interested in a particular Chicago data set, drop an email. The email address chicagostudies@uchicago.edu will get to me. Happy to connect you with resources, give you some citations for that bibliography that you have to build. Likewise, Chicago Studies is able to provide microgrants. CEGU does a really good job of funding this, but if there are particular costs that you're accruing in conjunction with your thesis or your capstone research that is here in the Chicago area, particularly if you want to provide a small amount of compensation or a thank you to people who are informing your thesis as interviewers, or you need assistance with transportation costs, or some of the research that you need requires time from an external person, external entity in the city. Chicago Studies can complement the resources available to you through CEGU, just to make sure that we're giving back appropriately to our partners throughout the city. And then Chicago Studies does publish an annual publication, the Chicago Studies Annual. This is a compilation of really excellent research about the city of Chicago that comes out every year. We solicit submissions for that and for our annual undergraduate research prize, usually at the beginning of the spring quarter. So the call for those will be coming out. For those of you working on Chicago, that call will be coming out in a couple of weeks. Excited to see the research that comes through. I should also put in a plug for those who are in their final year. The college sponsors an annual undergraduate research colloquium that is usually in the middle of April. And so the research you're presenting on tends to be not quite your finished research, but rather your research in process. That's a really great opportunity to kind of hone your research in a different way by putting it in dialogue with people who come by to ask you about it. I can't encourage you enough to take that into consideration. This year, the deadline for those abstracts is February 12th, so coming up next week. It's not required for consideration for the Chicago Studies Prize, but again, it's just a great way to put your scholarship into dialogue with other people. If I could add advice to the great advice that you've heard already today, the more people that you can talk with about the questions that you're thinking about, the better chance you have. Every time you articulate what you're thinking, you're formulating your thought in new ways and putting it into dialogue with different kinds of people who are asking different kinds of questions of the research, the things that are important to you. So if you're thinking about Chicago, you think you might want to think about Chicago, happy to be a resource to you, fairly easy to find, and we're conveniently located right on the other side of this wall. So don't hesitate to chase me down. I would love to be helped, and I would love to read some more great projects about Chicago. Thanks.
So can I add one thing? I know it's not a capstone, or anything late, but one more thing about the thesis application. If you are doing a thesis for public policy or some other department or for an MA program, you still have to apply for this CEGU thesis. So don't assume that because you've already been accepted into the MAPS program or to some other program and you're doing a thesis that it counts for this major as well. So just a heads up, you still have to apply for the thesis.
So, hi everyone, I'm Jessica Landau. I'm going to be talking to you about the Capstone option, which is the other option available to you in your fourth year if the thesis isn't what you're interested in. And it's an alternative to the thesis that often involves a different kind of research, maybe perhaps something like community engagement or experiential learning. And it kind of allows you to structure your course selection instead of maybe just your individual research around some of your interests. And there are two capstone options available to you. The first one is a course pairing that's going to be a designated capstone course with an elective, and the other option is a community field study. I'll also note though, for this option, like the thesis, you also have to apply. You'll notice that that application is due the same date on March 29th. So whatever option you're taking, you have to fill out an application to tell us that's the choice that you're making and kind of how you're going to carry out that plan. I'll also note Capstone students will be presenting their projects also at the fourth year symposium in the spring. And instead of the 10-minute presentation, Capstone projects are presented usually in a poster or video format. And we'll have some examples of that in a moment. So here is the first option, and this is where you take two courses, one the capstone course and the other an elective. But we really encourage you to think about this again as a way to shape your own kind of curriculum and your research agenda by choosing two courses that are paired. They might be looking at interrelated themes, perhaps from different disciplines. And often one of them has an experiential learning or kind of applied research component as a capstone course in some kind of big project. And this is, again, a way when you're pairing these courses, thinking about these options to create a meaningful and engaged capstone experience. And that way you're also shaping, again, your own coursework, but producing a project that might kind of come out of the work of both of these courses together. And that might turn into something that you can use as an example in a job application or grad school application, or that might turn into something like a journal article or another research project in the future. We have some sample options of course pairings on the screen. And so you could do something like, well, many of you, a handful of you here are already taking the Calumet Corridor. And so even if you're taking that in your third year, that counts as your capstone option if you're interested. You could do something like the environmental law practicum or environmental justice and principle and practice, and then present kind of what happens, the practicum aspect of that at the conference at the end of the year. You could take my September term course, Remaking the Prairie, about ecological restoration at the Medewan National Tallgrass Prairie, and then ecology in the Anthropocene. Or take Hillary Strang's class on science fiction with my spring course about cryptozoology, right? To look at monsters and weird stuff together. And these are just based on the classes that we know our core CEGU faculty are teaching right now, but our other affiliated faculty and other courses across the university, right, haven't been posted fully for next year yet. So there'll be many more of these connections kind of coming in soon once course schedules are finalized, but these are only the ones that we have individual control of right now. So don't panic if there's not something that you're excited about and interested there. There will be more connections made in the future. The second capstone option is a community field study. And this combines some kind of off-campus summer field study, which could be something like an internship that is then aligned with your academic coursework. So if you already have an internship lined up this summer that connects to what you're studying in CEGU, this might be a really great option for you. And so the timeline of this, but also if you don't already have an internship lined up and you want to do this, don't worry, we can help you figure that out too. And I'll have more on that on the next slide. But for the timeline, sometime before the application is due on March 29th, we ask that you meet with Professor Mary Beth Pudup, who's actually unavailable to meet with us tonight. But if you have any questions about it, she's the person who manages this, and you have to meet with her as part of the application process, because what she'll do is help you kind of direct this summer internship or community field study experience to align with your own research and professional goals. And then over the summer, you would complete this summer field study or internship. And then when you return in the fall, enroll in her course, Genealogies of Environmental Organizing and Activism. And hopefully you'll have other students who have done this summer internship too. And part of your coursework will be to actually analyze your experience and think about the organization you worked with, perhaps critically, productively. And then similarly to the other course pairing, enroll in another topical elective that connects to those same themes that you've been working on over the summer. And I'm sure you all know about Handshake and other places on campus to look for things like summer opportunities, but CEGU has some that we've worked to kind of curate for you, including this brand new internship at the Warren Woods Field Station, which is a really exciting opportunity for CEGU students. And these are some examples of the kinds of internships that I think for obvious reasons, align really closely with the kind of work that many of you are doing in SIGU already. And again, there's many more here. Yes. It's a good point. And there's also on that screen flashing the QR code that I think links to the, if anyone wants to run up and take that now. But again, when we send you all of these slides, right, these are all links that will send you directly to more information about each one. If none of these interest you, if you meet with Mary Beth, you can also kind of craft, she'll help you find organizations perhaps that you want to work with. Maybe you're not staying in Chicago for the summer, questions like that. She'll help you figure out all of those. And so we have some sample capstone projects for you to look at. And so these are the kinds of things that you would produce after this experience where you've done research in 2 different courses, but perhaps kind of aligned projects, and you're thinking about something like the history of conservation at the Indiana Dunes. And the research you've done in that course, perhaps for something like a seminar paper, would then be turned into a poster like this that would be presented at our symposium at the end of the year. Here's another example about historic parks in Chicago and one on Marquette Park. And again, kind of from a historical perspective, or research about something like access to rooftop solar in the city is another project that came out of coursework. So where the thesis is directed independent study, a lot of the capstone projects are coming out of coursework and perhaps expanding on that work when you're thinking about pairing 2 courses together that might be doing interconnected, interrelated work. So as a reminder, and those posters I was just showing, right, are what is presented for capstone students at the symposium in the spring of your 4th year. And so thesis students and capstone students will all present in some form at the symposium. And this year, just to mark your calendars, the symposium will be on May 24th. And it's a day-long, really big and exciting event. And as a few of us have mentioned already, there are research grants and prizes for undergraduate research. And all of these you can view more information about these on the SIGU website, but here's a timeline of some important dates. And again, as Chris mentioned, this isn't just for thesis projects. Some of these grants you can use for capstone projects as well. So as you're thinking about, thinking ahead to some of the courses that you might want to do, you might have an idea of the projects that might be developing out of those classes. And so the same day that the thesis or capstone application is due is an info session that we'll be hosting about undergraduate research funding. I think probably here again. And then in week 4 of next quarter is when the application opens for SIGU grants, the ones that SIGU just gives. There are other grants kind of in other units around the university that we can't control, but our own internal grants will be open on the 12th of April. And then the application is due on the 26th. So by that point, you'll have an idea of if you've been accepted into the thesis, which capstone courses you're doing, so you'll have a clear idea of how to develop a research proposal. But we're also happy to meet with you to assist with that. And then by the end of the spring quarter, you'll be notified of the award of the grant and can plan your summer work and your summer travel. And again, don't worry about taking down any of this info now. This is all on the SIGU website, but also, again, you'll have access to these slides. But here's contact info for kind of the key people who can help with all of these questions you may have about thesis and capstone research. So as a reminder, Topher is managing the thesis work, is teaching the BA colloquium. I'm just in general the coordinator of undergraduate studies. So if you have questions about coursework, scheduling, how to do any of the requirements for the major, you can meet with me or with Tess about those kinds of things. And again, this year, Evan's the coordinator of the BA capstone, but next year, Mary Beth will be doing that. So it's a little, and then as another reminder too, Mary Beth here, Director of Community Studies, is the person to contact about capstone questions for next year. And then other key links about the program and the requirements. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry, I sped through that because I wanted to save room for questions. I don't know who had their hand up first. Who wants to go first? Go ahead. Yeah.
So if we're doing the ENS team thesis, is that like the same process? Because like, as far as I know, like, okay.
For the thesis.
So
yes.
I'm just going to repeat questions so that the people who are watching this on recording know what. So the question is if ENST thesis requirements are the same, and the answer is yes.
Same deadline, same application process. Yeah, just by a different name. Sam, go ahead.
Sorry. So if I'm double majoring, I'm probably lined up and advisor for my thesis. A different discipline, is it typical to have an advisor for both of my majors, or would there just be that one advisor and I wouldn't even have a single advisor? What's the policy?
So the question is, if a student is double majoring, do they need two advisors for each discipline, or do they just use one advisor?
And the answer is you just need one advisor. You still have to fill out the application form. But in the question that asks you about faculty advisors lists that particular faculty advisor, and that person will sort of double as CBU, and I believe it's sociology is your other one. Yeah.
I would also recommend filling out in the application where it asks for the CBU faculty, because everyone's thesis could have a second reader. From CBU, so if you want any sort of, preference, listening preference about that. Here's how many people have internships lined up for the summer already. Couple people. So you might want to think about the community field study option if you're doing the Capstone. If you are interested in internship though, like I said, those are open for application, and you can also meet with Professor Kudo who will help you find an internship, or with any of us.